Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome. Who wants to fix the American healthcare system? Yeah! Get the cost of drugs off of our backs. It's been a huge day for the campaign. It's the first day of the New Way Forward Iowa bus tour. And I just qualified for the December debates. And neither of those would have been possible without you all. You all know this is a campaign of the people to rewrite the rules of the economy to work for us, and that certainly includes the cost of healthcare. I can't wait to hear your stories. Thank you so much for sharing, because your stories are not your own. We know that there are millions of Americans who are struggling with very, very similar things around the country, but we can fix them. That is the power of Iowa. It is your power alone, Iowa. You know how many Californians each of you is worth? 1,000 Californians each, that's right. So you look around these two rooms tonight, this is like 2.5 football stadiums worth of Californians. That's the power of this place. That's why I love campaigning here, because this is one of the only places where it feels real. It's one of the only places where democracy actually still works the way it's intended. You go around the rest of the country and say, we're going to fix healthcare. They're like, yeah, but they can't really fix healthcare, truthfully. Only you can do that, Iowa. And I think that is exactly what you are going to do on February 3rd of next year. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you. My coat off, because I'll be here a little while. Can't have that.
All right, so we're going to start by each of our panelists talking about their personal stories and their struggle with the rising cost of prescription drug prices. So I think we're going to start with Michelle, Michelle, yep. And she's going to start by talking about her story.
Okay, so in 1987, I was 13 years old and I had a problem, and they discovered that I had a bleeding disorder. It's called von Willebrand's disease. And if you're actually bleeding, there's really only one thing that'll help. It's this drug here. Once you open that bottle, it's only good for 6 months. And it's only 2.5 milliliters in the bottle. How much do you think it's worth?
How much do they charge for that 2.5 milliliter bottle?
$865.46.
Wow.
It's only good for 6 months, and you're supposed to have it with you all the time. Of course, I never have. Not since 87 have I had it with me all the time. I only get it when something goes wrong, and then if, there's a problem, I have it for in the next 6 months, I'm good. But it is a very niche drug. It only works for hemophilia A and von Willebrand's disease. And it has been an astronomical price since 1987 because it's a niche market. They did find that they could use it for one other thing. And if they dilute it 50 times, then they can use it for people who wet the bed. So there is a cheaper version, but it's pretty much useless if you have a bleeding disorder. How do you want to fix that?
So can you talk about how this works? Can you talk about what the actual loss in it, because it sounds like in your case, if you don't have the drug, then some negative things happen, and then at that point you are put in a position where you have no choice but to pay the price. Is that right?
Well, I do have a choice. I can have a nosebleed for 9 days, or I can go to the ER and get it.
Well, that sounds like no choice at all, am I right?
No, the no choice is like, you fall down and, so I cut my Achilles tendon 85 to 95% through once. Otherwise, I get it if I'm going to have surgery. There's no option at that point. But if you can possibly get by without it, you do.
Well, there shouldn't be any reason for you to get by without it. It sounds like if our system worked correctly, you'd have had it on you essentially every day since 1987, because we all know life happens and you might have an accident or bleed or have a nosebleed essentially at any moment. And so you should have had access to this drug the entire time. And the fact that it is, let's call it $150 a month for this substance, is a product of the way we price drugs in this country, where the business model of these pharmaceutical companies is certainly not your well-being or my well-being or the well-being of anyone in this room. The drug companies are just designed to maximize revenue and profits. And it has gone, switch mics with you, or we'll share. Thank you. It's gone way beyond what any reasonable person would accept. And I have a friend who's gone through the numbers, and she said she has never seen price gouging and profiteering on the level that she now sees among the drug companies and the device companies and the private insurance companies. Our entire healthcare industry is essentially run amok, where this drug, they thought, well, we're going to ratchet up the price because that's what we quote unquote need to charge to quote unquote make money. What they don't talk about is the fact that the American taxpayer subsidized the development of the vast majority of these drugs and subsidized certainly a lot of the research that has gone into the development of these drugs. So we essentially paid for it once already. And then they say, hey, you need to pay for it again in some very, very dark and punitive ways. So I have a 5-part plan to get the price of drugs down to an acceptable range, because the drug companies only speak one language, and we know what that language is. It's just dollars and cents. You could stand outside and protest outside the drug companies every day and say, do the right thing, and it would have absolutely no effect. We all know that. So we have to hit them where it hurts. So here's my 5-part plan to try and get the cost of drugs like Stymate down. Number one, the government right now is not allowed to negotiate for lower drug prices on behalf of the American people. That seems like a very obvious step. You're nodding.
Yes.
Yeah. And why is that? Because the drug lobbyists have managed to lobby away any effort to enable the government to negotiate for lower price on our behalf. So the first move is to say, of course, the U.S. government has to be able to negotiate for lower prices on behalf of the American people. That's something that every other nation already does. It's just in America, where our government has been bought and sold by the corporate interests time and time again, that this is off the table. And that's one reason why this campaign is the antidote. Because we raised $10 million last quarter in increments of only $30 each. My fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. But there are a lot of them, and there's zero corporate PAC money in there, which means I don't owe the drug lobbyists anything. I don't own the pharma companies anything. And I'm going to get there and say, of course, we should be able to negotiate for lower prices. Number two is that right now Americans are paying 2, 3, 4 times as much as citizens of other countries for the same drugs. Again, we subsidize the development of the vast majority of these drugs, and they're charging us 2, 3, 4 times more. So the second step is to say you have to charge us within a certain percentage, let's call it 20% of the average of what you're charging other companies. Very reasonable, right? You know, like even if you're a customer, would you want to hear it's like, hey, you're charging someone in Iowa like $50 and then you cross state line to Minnesota and all of a sudden it's $10? That would infuriate you, right? That's what's happening to us with the drug prices. So you have international reference pricing and you say you have to be within this range. Number three, if you fail at number two, then we can forcibly appropriate your license. And then number four, actually manufacture them in a public facility. This would be the giant stick that the drug companies would be very, very eager to steer clear of. They'd be like, oh my gosh, if they get the patent for Stymate and then they start manufacturing it, how much are we going to charge? Instead of $150 a month, what do you all think would be a reasonable price for?
0.
15, 0, some fraction. And I have a feeling that the government would be like, you know what? Let's say we charge you $15 a month for this. We'd actually make our money back. You know? So this would be the club that the drug companies would be looking to avoid. And number five is we also would reserve the right to actually import drugs from other countries because sometimes drugs get developed in other countries. There are European drug companies. And so you could introduce a level of competition. Do you all think this plan would work to get down the price of drugs like Stymate?
Yeah.
Thank you. Not only would this work, but this is about the only plan that would work. We have to break the stranglehold of the drug lobbyists on our government, and I'm just the man for that job. And I'm going to do it for you and all the Americans like you who should have access to drugs that would improve our lives. That's the purpose of this industry, to develop these drugs to improve our lives, right? At least that's what it should be. That's what their freaking ads say all the time. You know what I mean? Oh, well, while we're at it, I want to ban TV ads for prescription drugs. Those ads serve no public purpose. All they do is increase both the profits and the costs of the drugs. And hearing those terrible side effects over and over again is a real drag for us all. There are only 2 countries, I believe, that allow for that stuff. The United States of America and New Zealand. I have no idea why New Zealand doesn't. So every other country looked at it and being like, why on earth would you allow for TV ads of prescription drugs that the physician should, in theory, know everything about, evaluate the patient, and then decide for you to get it? Like, what public health purpose does it enhance for us to be seeing these ridiculous ads? So I can't wait to make those things illegal. They actually increase the prices of these drugs, and we can do better than that. Are we good here?
So, hi Andrew, my name's Alex. My wife and I are living out something you've said before. We moved into my parents' basement 2 weeks ago to both file bankruptcy. I have sleep apnea that was diagnosed when I was 23 years old, and my wife is struggling with endometriosis. So I've seen, some of the issues with just the cost of, prescription equipment with my CPAP machine. I had private insurance at the time, and what happened is they put it on a rental program with your CPAP machine where you are supposed to pay for this over a period of 2 years, continue to prove to them that you're actually using the machine, and then at the end of the period, it becomes yours, is the way it was explained to me. What they don't talk about is what happens if you lose your insurance in the meantime, which is exactly what happened to me. I switched jobs, had to move back to Des Moines from a town in southwest Iowa, and when I did, the full bill from Hammer Medical showed up, and it was $3,500. And I'll tell you right now, I haven't paid it. It's been 5 years. I don't have it. And especially now when we're battling my wife's endometriosis, which has been, she is my age. We're both 28 years old. She's now racked up $200,000 in medical debt because of a lot of the same reasons. She needs, endometriosis is a hard to treat illness. There aren't any cures. There are a variety of different drugs that doctors attempt to treat it. There are very few specialists that you can find. And so we've gone on this wild goose chase where we chase, treatment after treatment after treatment. But each time what happens is she goes through an episode of pain once a month. Who knew? And when she does, sometimes it causes her to miss work. And eventually you miss work enough, it's no fault of the companies. They're doing what they need to do. Sometimes they have to let you go. And so she works as a CNA doing some of the most noble work I've ever, witnessed, and has such a huge heart, but sometimes she just can't get up and do it. She's in too much pain. And the cost of pain medication alone it's not great options, taking Vicodin all the time. It's not great options, turning around and trying different birth control after different birth control. And there are some permanent solutions, but who would want to take them at 28 years old? And so we've been left in this wasteland where we had tried everything. And then about a year and a half ago, we got on a study. It was a drug study for a new drug that for once we actually had a real solution, and it was great. Because she was a part of the study, we got all her medications covered. The only thing we had to pay for out of pocket was her pain medication. Everything else was covered for the first time, all her gynecology, everything. And then she lost 6% of her bone density in the first 6 months of being on the study. The drug didn't work for her. So what was treating her was also causing her to have, be on a path to have osteoporosis into her early 30s. What a nightmare. And so she was dropped from the study. The doctor dropped her. And wouldn't you know it, her new insurance with her new employer, that doctor doesn't take that insurance. And so we're back in the same boat, having to start all over. And so 2 weeks ago, we made the tough decision after a civil judgment showed up for one of her hospital bills. We decided to move back in with my parents so we could start filing bankruptcy and at least hit a reset and try to get a more permanent solution. But we have 3 young children, one of whom has some special needs. And, you know, I've had my own battles with her medication and trying to make sure she's 7. We have 3 daughters, 9, 7, and 6. And so we should be focusing on being parents, not working 2 jobs each, not working 60 hours a week sometimes, not battling our own health episodes till we're blue in the face. And it's remarkable to me that there are drugs that my wife can take, but there's no way we can afford them even when we put every ounce of effort into it. And I want to thank you for your plan, because some of those solutions will definitely help.
Thank you, man. Is it okay if I give you a hug?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much for sharing, Alex. I know it's hard to share, though, again, this story is not just yours and your wife's and your family's. Healthcare bills are the #1 cause of bankruptcy for families around the country. And when you say 200,000 in healthcare bills, it's a shocking number to people here in this room, unless, unfortunately, you've interacted with the healthcare system, and then you can see how the bills can become 6 figures very, very quickly, in part because the way they bill us is complete fabrication, essentially. If you dig in, what you find is that they might bill you and your wife $200,000. It certainly did not cost them $200,000, and they do not expect $200,000. It's similar to what I joked about, but unfortunately it's the dark truth, where if they charge you $50 for something in Iowa and then $10 in Minnesota, and you'd be furious. The same thing's happening in our healthcare system, where they could charge someone $20,000 in one locality, $8,000 in another, and it makes no sense or rhyme or reason. And then if push comes to shove, they'll actually negotiate that $200,000 and say, hey, we didn't really mean the $200,000. If you were to give us 40, we'd be all right with that. But then who even has 40? You know, and you talk about the sleep apnea, the CPAP machine. To me, you have to look at it, or the healthcare system should look at it. What is the additional value of helping someone with their sleep apnea in terms of that person's productivity and wakefulness day to day? You could see that productivity increase in like the $1,000 each year very, very easily. What is the cost of them not getting that CPAP machine? Not just lost productivity and wakefulness for that individual, but then, you know, over time it would exacerbate some of the other health problems that one would have. So if you were to try and put a value on you having that CPAP, it actually ends up paying for itself pretty quickly in just about any context. So there's so many components of your story that are familiar, unfortunately. So #1, for the CPAP, you can't be rent to own like a piece of equipment and then somehow stick you with this crazy bill at the end because your insurance changes. And that's one of the byproducts of this hodgepodge of insurance we have, where none of us understands our insurance plans in the least. I know what I mean? It's like no one knows what's going on. It's like a labyrinth. It's so much of a maze. I actually looked up how many Americans work in the healthcare insurance industry just at the insurance companies, just to figure out how complex it is. And the number I found was 660,000 Americans work just administering our healthcare insurance plans in the private insurers, because of stuff like that, where if you change, then all of a sudden they'll try and stick you with the bill. So we need to have a public healthcare plan that covers us all, that doesn't end up pulling the rug out from under us in abrupt ways that if you switch coverage that you're not going to get stuck with a multi-$1,000 bill. Your wife, if she has a condition that drugs can be helpful for, again, instead of sticking you with these incredible unsustainable costs that no normal American family could afford, we need to get that cost down to a level that anyone could afford. And while that seems too good to be true, the numbers in our healthcare system indicate that we're spending right now $3.6 trillion on our healthcare, and 30% of it is waste. That's $1 trillion a year in waste. And so anyone who looks around and says, like, how can you afford it? You all should know that we're spending twice as much on our healthcare right now to worse results, and it's enriching the drug companies, the device companies, the private insurers, and it's not making us stronger and healthier. So when you start looking at the reality of what we're spending, we instead need to shift it to try and make us stronger and healthier, and then make it so that the providers don't have an incentive attached to, imagine a country, and we can make this country happen with your help, Iowa. Imagine a country where, it's Alex, right? Yeah. Where Alex and his wife sits with a doctor and then says, hey, this is the set of drugs that you need. And they make that prescription based purely upon their clinical judgment. And the cost is not borne by the individual family, but borne by our country at large. That is actually a reality in most of the world. In most of the world, we do not have this market-driven system where individual citizens get stuck with a bill for hundreds of thousands of dollars. We can do better. We can make it so that our healthcare system is actually designed to maximize your quality of life, your wife's quality of life, and your ability to do what we all here in the room know you should be doing, which is spending time with your kids, looking after them, making them stronger and healthier. Are your parents here today?
No, I'm actually from Des Moines. I made the trip to talk to you about this today.
Well, thank you for doing that. Moving back in with your I mean, I'm sure on some level your parents are really pumped to spend more time with their granddaughters. But on another level, they'd rather that you be in another house where they can visit you and not have you in the basement. We're setting up our next generations to fail, truly. And this is why I'm running for president. Is if you were born in the United States of America in the 1940s, there's a 93% chance you're going to do better than your parents. If you were born in the 1990s, which I think applies to you, right? 91? Yeah, 91. You're down to a 50-50 shot, so you can see which way the trend is going. And then now it's going below 50%. And so we need to change that. We need to rewrite the rules so that your parents don't worry as much about you and your wife and their granddaughters, and then you can look your granddaughters in the eyes and say, hey, things are going to be better for you. That's the American dream that brought my family here to this country. The American dream is dying. Alex's story is much, much more normal than we wish it were. And it's going to be up to the people here in Iowa to say we need bigger changes that are being proposed by just about any of the major candidates, and we need to rewrite the rules to work for us. So imagine if Alex and his wife, what's your wife's name?
Her name's Micah.
If Alex and Micah were each getting $1,000 a month starting 2021, maybe one of them would be able to scale back from doing 2 jobs and just do 1 job. Or maybe one of them would be able to spend time with the girls. And then imagine if they knew that when their daughters turned 18, they were each going to get $1,000 a month. Would that be a game changer if you were a parent trying to plan for the future?
It would make so much of a difference, especially for my daughter. You know, she requires a lot of extra special care and attention, and we've had struggles with trying to get her IEP at the school, you know, really balanced to work for her. And I'm only split so many ways. You know, there's sporting events for my oldest daughter, which she deserves my attention.
Of course.
You know, and then my middle daughter, who has some more behavior challenges and some things we have to work through. Unfortunately, I have such a limited resource of extra time.
Of course, man, you're doing 2 jobs. And you split it different ways.
And so she gets a lot of it. And then, you know, the one who gets the most left out is the youngin', and that's not fair. And without having to do that extra, I'd be able to plan so many more events and so many things. And give them a break from each other, because gosh, sisters that close, they fight, they have their own things, and You know, we are not able to take them on one-on-one things because if we do something, we do it as a family because that's the only time we have together.
I've got a 7-year-old as well who also has special needs. That you probably know that, Alex. We discovered he was on the autism spectrum when he was 3, turning 4. It was such a relief, but then we got him an IEP and went through this process with his schools. He ended up in a special needs school because his needs were very distinct. His brother's in public school, but the schools around the country don't have the necessary resources or expertise to accommodate many of these kids. Many of our schools, unfortunately, just like it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul. Like if you say, hey, you need like an additional resource there, then they have to say, well, I'm going to cut back on something else. So we need to make this a federal priority and say, look, we can't put communities in position where they feel like they're making these incredible trade-offs, these very difficult decisions. Instead, we have to say that special needs is the new normal in this country. And that's not just me saying it because it's in my family, that's in the numbers. Like what's going on with your daughter and my son is commonplace now. How many of you all like have a family member or friend or neighbor whose child has special needs of some kind? No, I mean, that's more than half of us. So I think that demonstrates that this is the new normal, and leaving a family like yours on an island to figure it out is unacceptable. It's one of the reasons I'm running for president, what my wife and I went through with our son, because we thought about what it would be like to go through that as a single mom or in a family around the country that didn't have the right resources in the community, and it's heartbreaking. The stress of figuring out what happened with Christopher was extraordinarily difficult for my wife and I, and we had a lot of advantages that we know that a lot of people around the country did not. So kudos to you for being an awesome dad and fighting through it. Let's give Alex a round of applause. And Alex, I can tell that your family is so filled with love. Most important thing that kids get. Like if the kids are loved, they know it, they appreciate it, and even if you and your mom like have to bring them all out in a group, they understand where your heart is. Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Hi, my name is Michael. I'm from Des Moines, yeah, I've had a lot of issues with getting just for most of my life. I've had issues with depression, and I finally, like a few years ago, decided to try to just finally find some kind of like solution for that. And so I went through a series of drugs with my primary care physician, and none of them worked. So we started trying other methods like ECTs or electroconvulsive therapy, which didn't really do any bad, but it didn't really do any good either. Yeah, so I just kind of, eventually we did come across a drug that did work, but it was a drug that's used for Alzheimer's. So basically, once my samples ran out, my insurance wouldn't be able to cover that, and it was going to be something I would be taking like long term. So that was kind of just like off the wall until I could get a lot of resources to do that. I basically just had to kind of like just take it in my own hands and just like find like stuff that you could just use over the counter.
So what have you found that has been helping you?
Well, I use right now just like these herbs like ashwagandha and like kratom, which are just like they're just like from like foreign countries basically, and they have some. They seem to help a bit, but I think I'd be better served if I could go through the medical system. But yeah, one of those. Have you heard of that?
No, I can't say I have. Is it okay if I give you a hug as well, Michael?
Yeah.
No, come on over, man. We've all been there, brother. I'm so glad that you decided to seek help for your depression. There are many, many Americans who are depressed and do not seek help. They feel like there's some stigma attached to it. They feel like it says that there's something wrong with them. Everyone struggles. We should acknowledge that struggle as a part of life. And there are many things that you can do to try and help ease depression, but it starts with just acknowledging it. Like if you walk around and say, like, I don't need help, like that's actually when some of the absolute worst things can happen. And many of us, I'm sure, here in the room have had family members and loved ones who struggle with depression, and sometimes very, very tragic things can occur. At the extreme end, it's a killer. So acknowledging it is awesome. And as a country, we're in the midst of a mental health crisis. It's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about trying to rewrite the rules of the economy, because right now we're following corporate profits and GDP and headline unemployment off a cliff, because while corporate profits are at record highs, also at record highs in the United States of America, depression, anxiety, stress, suicides, drug overdoses, student loan debt, financial insecurity. Like, these are all the real indicators of how we are doing. And so how can you be excited about record high corporate profits if your life expectancy has declined for 3 years in a row because suicides and drug overdoses have both overtaken vehicle deaths as causes of death in the United States of America, which has happened. You all know the last time America's life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row?
Decades.
The Spanish flu of 1918, a global pandemic that killed millions. You have to go back that far to find a point in American history where life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row. It is not normal for life expectancy in a developed country to decline once. Ordinarily, it just keeps on migrating upwards. But here in the U.S., it's went down and then down and then down again. This is nearly unprecedented. And is anyone betting that it's going to somehow reverse itself in year 4? No, we're all looking at this trend might be here to stay. A lot of it is because of our mental health indicators heading the wrong direction. So if you measure the wrong things, you're never going to make progress. We should actually be measuring our mental health and freedom from substance abuse, how our kids are doing, our clean air and clean water, wellness and life expectancy. These are the foundational measurements of a community. And if that community is falling apart, you need to know it. You need to actually have, first, you have to say red flag is a massive problem, and then you have to have the resources and put them to work. We should declare a mental health crisis in this country and then dramatically invest in resources to help. One of the most powerful things we could do would be to integrate mental health resources and our medical system. Because many people show up to a hospital and they have a health problem that has a related psychological and mental health component. Something around drug addiction or diabetes or a lot of these conditions that you show up in a hospital for, there is a mental health component. And in the environments where they have integrated mental health and the medical system, you've seen dramatic improvements in patient outcomes, which all of us instinctively know would happen, right? Like if you went in for a checkup and they said, hey, you want to go see the psychologist down the hall, who would turn that down, first of all? Like, none of us. We love talking about ourselves. You get in there and be like, have I got a story for you? Let me tell you about myself. So this would be a game changer, and it would save us money. That's what a lot of this confusion is around our measurements and being like, oh, well, and I hope you've gotten this from some of my earlier numbers. The biggest lie in American life is that we don't have the money. we're up to $21 trillion. We're the richest country in the history of the world. Do you all remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street 10 years ago?
No.
No, none of us voted for that. Do you remember anyone saying, like, where are we going to get the money? Where are we going to get the money to bail out Wall Street? Do you remember anyone concerned about that? No. They were like, what, 4 trillion? Sure. There it is. Let's just hope the American people don't notice we did that. Let's call it quantitative easing. They won't figure it out. This is true. So then you have individual families like Alex and Micah, like looking at it being like, well, where's our bailout? Where's our $4 trillion? It's like, oh no, like it's like a country where it's like, if you struggle as an individual or family, all your fault. But if you get into trouble and you're a drug company or a bank, then we must bail you out because you bought and sold our government, and and you hire us all out of Washington after we leave these jobs. I mean, that's really the truth of what's gone on in our country, and it's immoral. It's unconscionable. I was so shaken by the bailout of Wall Street. I quit my job and started a nonprofit and ran that nonprofit for 7 years to help create thousands of jobs in cities around the country. Because I thought, what a disaster if our energies are going to create these exotic financial instruments that crash the economy. And I was like, we bailed these guys out. Are you kidding me? And like, none of those guys showed any leadership or responsibility at all. You ever hear one of them be like, hey, I get paid hundreds of millions of dollars to make these decisions. So if this happened on my watch, it was on me. Did you ever hear any of them say that? No. Like, instead it was like, who could know? It's like, are you kidding? You want to give back your salary for the last 10 years if you had that attitude? So this is a symptom of what's gone wrong. And that if someone like Michael is struggling with their mental health and finds something that helps, that's actually, again, a huge payout to society. Instead of seeing that as like a cost, like who can afford that drug, it's more like, how can you afford not to give Michael that drug? Because if it makes Michael stronger and healthier, again, what's the payout to society? Enormous. You measure that over a number of years, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's actually negative hundreds of thousands of dollars that he does not get that drug if that drug helps make him stronger, healthier, and better. I will say, so one thing, I don't know how popular this will be, but I'm for legalizing marijuana. And it's legal in some states. We can tell that the criminal laws end up being unduly punitive towards certain groups of people. Let's call them black people. Or women. At this point, if you had a choice between someone relieving their pain with marijuana or opiates, you would probably prefer they use marijuana in many circumstances because the opiates are likely to wind up killing them over a certain period of time, whereas the marijuana will not. So we have to actually invest in making our people stronger and healthier, really doing anything that works. If you find herbs that work, check. If you find drugs that work, check. Pot, sure. Honestly, I mean, so despite everything I just said, I do think that we have gone overboard in this country in terms of using drugs as a solution to many of these things. My brother's a clinical psychology professor and has found that there are non-pharmaceutical approaches to making people stronger and healthier. That to me would be a preference or option one. And this is more possible if you can integrate mental health into your healthcare system. But if someone like Michael discovers that, hey, these drugs really help me, and I've tried these other things, they don't work, then you should be able to get that drug 100%, and it should not be a financial burden for you to do so.
I think now would be a good time maybe to take one or two questions from the audience. If anyone has any, just raise your hand. We can bring you a mic. In the back, maybe.
Thank you in the back for bearing with us.
Sure. I love you.
Thank you all for sharing your stories.
We need the marijuana, trust me.
Well, you were so enthused.
My bleeding disorder, I can't take NSAIDs. I'm cane family non-reactive. I can't take anything can drive to Illinois.
You can get an opiate prescription.
Yeah, I know. I can go to Illinois and get.
I should have let you in on a secret. They are working on a brand of marijuana with my name on it. It is called Yang Ganja.
I guess I could sell that on your website.
Got a question for you, Andrew. What's been your best moment on the campaign so far?
Oh. So ordinarily, if someone asks me that question, I talk about putting my head next to the person who tattooed my face on their calf. But since you are that person who tattooed your face on their calf, but since you are that person, I have to give a different answer. So the second best time I've had on the trail was when I got to introduce my wife Evelyn to the crowd right here in Iowa at Yangapalooza. I greeted her with such warmth and love that she felt welcomed with open arms immediately, and I was immensely grateful. Yeah.
Any other questions?
When will you 1v1 Ted Cruz?
As soon as that man accepts my challenge, I told him anytime, any place. And for those of you who don't know the backstory, I challenged Ted Cruz to a game of basketball. He accepted. And then when we reached out to him to schedule a date and time, he completely ghosted us and went radio silent. And the scuttlebutt from the inside is that he realized I'm going to beat him and that it would be bad for his career politically to lose to me in such embarrassing and disgraceful fashion. So he's now been ducking me ever since. But the American people won't stand for that. So that's where we are. Pretty much Ted can name the date and time. We're going to play for charity. If he's a man of his word, we'll get a date.
My question, just about drugs. What I wonder is, in my experience, because I've had some mental health drugs, the effectiveness of, and you're saying the same thing, the effectiveness of so many of these things is so low and so questionable. And is there, I think there needs to be some kind of transparency in terms of, and outcomes of all sorts of things in medicine where the outcome percentages are so small.
I agree. It's one reason why I like people pursuing non-pharmaceutical treatments, because when you talk to even an experienced psychiatrist or neurologist, and you sit down with them and you're depressed and say, hey, do you want to prescribe something? They'll prescribe you a drug, and what do they always say to you? This has worked for some of my patients.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot of precision around that statement.
It'll take 6 months to.
Yeah, it'll take X months. We'll see. We'll try. There'll be side effects.
Yeah.
And then if it doesn't work, you'll come back X months later and be like, oh, well, how about you try this one? And we'll be like there's a lot of trial and error baked in because the way these drugs interact with our brains is somewhat unpredictable and varies across patients.
Yeah.
So to me, the drugs are not a cure-all. They work in some instances for some patients, but if you can pursue another avenue, to me, that would be the first resort. Though again, if you find a drug that works, then you should be able to get that drug.
Hello. So I've been doing a lot of work in Keokuk, Iowa, trying to come up with some homelessness solutions to the problems that they're facing there, which is massive. Because, because they say a lot that they're a victim of their past success. It's one of the phrases that's peddled around, and the reason why is because there was tons and tons of $1 million homes, and then when those people left, because the city was experiencing kind of a brain drain, a bunch of abandoned housing was left, and then that's all falling apart, which is lowering the property values of the neighborhood, and basically it's creating this system of like systemic poverty there that leaders are really struggling to combat, which is one of the reasons why I support you and your UBI in particular, because the UBI would put the money into the hands of the citizens, and they would be able to stimulate that economy so that people are attracted to Keokuk again. But my question about mental health is, in a place like Keokuk, where there is so little incentive for professionals to move in here,
Yeah.
how do we get mental health professionals in?
Thank you for your work. That's incredible. When a nonprofit or agency, I'll stand up so you can hear me in the back. There's a wired mic. But there's a different mic that works too. Thank you. It's the Russians. Oh yeah, you can turn it off. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, teamwork. When a nonprofit or agency tries to help someone who's homeless, one of the first moves they make, they try and figure out whether that. No, he's got it. I trusted him. They try and figure out whether that person's entitled to any program benefits or income from the government. So imagine our country after you all get me into the White House and we pass the freedom dividend where everyone's entitled to $1,000 a month. That means that if there's a homeless person, that person's entitled to $1,000 a month. And then if you are a nonprofit or agency, all of a sudden you have this whole new set of resources to try and get this person up on their feet. Instead of that person having zero economic value, you know that everyone has value. Then as soon as you can get them into shelter or the system, then they can start getting that income. And that's going to be a game changer for many of these families. Now, to your original question is, how the heck can we get mental health professionals to rural areas and parts of Iowa that need it? Because right now they're understaffed. And it's not just mental health professionals, it's primary care doctors. And I want to delve into this because I'm passionate about this. Why is there a shortage of primary care doctors in the United States of America? Is it because there's a shortage of young people who want to be doctors?
No.
Of course not. Like, all of our friends would say, I want to be a doctor. Sure. So what happens when they actually go to college is then they get weeded out because we have this static number of slots in med school that has not changed for years. Your population grows. The common sense thing to do is, what we should do? Train some more doctors. They're like, no, let's not do that because then we make less money. Really, everything revolves around the almighty dollar in this country. So like, we'll make less money, so let's keep the slots the same. And then if you do go to med school, what do? Well, we're going to load you up with $200,000 in student loan debt. So do you want to go become a primary care doctor in rural Iowa? They'll be like, well, I've got this $200,000 in student loan debt, so maybe I'll become an anesthesiologist. And we're like, that's a good decision. And then you're going to end up in Chicago being an anesthesiologist, putting people to sleep. Because all your economic incentives are not to head towards underserved communities. Now, it's not quite as dramatic for mental health professionals because, we're not loading them up with debt in the same way, but a lot of the incentives are similar, where if you start in one of these programs, you might say, hey, I want to help a certain population, but then your financial incentives end up being to serve a wealthier, more affluent area where you can get paid more for your time and services. So what we need to do is we need to balance those scales for people who are making these kinds of decisions. Number one, we have to broaden the training programs really dramatically. Like if you want to be in a position where you can help make people stronger or communities stronger, instead of saying you have to frankly be awesome at organic chemistry and be really good at these standardized tests. These standardized tests have a very, very low relationship with your ability to do good in a community. We have to lighten up on this tyranny of the standardized tests. Do you know that we came up with the SAT during World War II as a means to identify which kids to not send to the front lines? How many of you knew that?
Because of you.
Yeah, because of me? Well, thank you. Yeah. So now we treat our entire country like it's wartime, using these SATs to bludgeon our kids. And then if someone wants to be a mental health professional, we also set up this elaborate training system being you need to be a genius at these various things in order to get into the program, and then it costs a certain amount. So we need to broaden the number of slots in the training programs, and then we need to put real financial incentives. So first you have a growing, larger pool of, let's call it, mental health professionals, psychologists, counselors, therapists. And then you look around and say, okay, where are the areas in the country that are essentially mental health deserts? And then if someone decides to go to a mental health desert, then we should just pay their student loan debt for them. We should like put financial incentives to work to try and balance the choices that they make. Because right now, these people will end up getting pushed by the market towards areas where they can make more money, and that will always be the case. Right now, we already have about 30% of the country's primary care desert, similar, actually even higher proportion, are mental health deserts. And so we have to get the professionals to the communities that could use them most, but it will not happen on its own. We have to actually create the incentives and balance it out so people can make those sorts of choices and make it easier to become one of these mental health professionals and medical staffers in the first place by lifting this entire crazy standardized testing gate that we've set up for it all.
I think that's all the time we have, everyone. Can we give our panel a round of applause?
Our hands. Put the money in our hands. The money in our hands. Put 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 the money in our hands. Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.